welcome to another episode of our podcast. Uh, Now, let's touch upon something that a lot of young women in India are going through: ovarian reserve. What exactly is ovarian reserve?
Every woman is born with a certain number of eggs. So that's the stockpile of eggs that you have. That cannot be changed, and it only decreases as time passes. So by the time a young girl starts to menstruate, she has about 1.5 lakh eggs left in the ovaries. While you might say that 1.5 lakh eggs is a lot of eggs, unfortunately, there is a process of what is called as atrophy, or continuously the eggs are getting destroyed in the ovaries. So every cycle, a woman produces one egg. Okay, to produce that one egg, thousands of eggs are destroyed, and this is the analogy of, shall we say, a go down with 100 sacks of eggs or 100 sacks of rice, and then you take out one and 10 sacks fall down. So you're only left with 90, and there's nothing to replenish. There's no way that that stock can be replenished. So as a woman ages, she continuously loses her eggs. Okay, so that is called as the ovarian reserve. So the ovarian reserve is basically the number of eggs that are present in the ovary, and you can't actually pinpoint and say, yeah, she's got 1,25,000 eggs. You can't say that, but you can say whether the ovarian reserve is good, it's suboptimal, or it's very bad.
I read somewhere that there's a decline in the ovarian reserve. Isn't that shocking? Have you come across these trends?
Yes. There is. There are of late a lot of young Indian women who are losing their fertility and decreasing their ovarian reserve. They are only married for a year. They are about, shall we say, 32, 33 in the prime of their life, and then they just come to see me just to see if everything is okay, and then suddenly they have a shock of their lives when you say that their ovarian reserve is low. So they have to kind of buck up and get pregnant quickly. Otherwise, they're going to lose their fertility very quickly. So that is a trend that is worrying.
What are the early signs that show that there's a decline in ovarian reserve?
Sometimes there's nothing. There's nothing really. Or sometimes you can start to have shortened periods or lengthy periods. And shortened periods is one of the important signs. So menstrual cycle is normal anywhere between, shall we say, 24 days to 35 days. But then if she starts to have 21-day cycles, or she starts to have 40-day cycles, decreased amount of bleeding, signs of menopause, which can be, having hot flushes, even in the peak of winter, they need to have a fan, or suddenly sweating, mood swings. Those could be the signs, but they don't come until very late. So quite often you have nothing. You're still having regular periods and you're still okay. And not having, again, irregular periods and lengthy periods, again, is a sign of final menopause. Mm-hmm. But we're not going there. We are talking about young women who are losing their ovarian reserve. So really there's hardly any signs that they have.
Now this is worrying. Is there anything that can be done to prevent this?
First of all, they should have a lot of awareness. Young Indian women should understand that because of the preservatives that we are eating with our food, or the various shall we say, pesticides, insecticides, the pollutants that we are breathing, the chemicals from the plastics that we are actually storing our water in, etc., which are all endocrine disruptors, they are going to be losing their fertility pretty quickly. And they should actually, and also women now are climbing the corporate ladder. They're not interested in settling down. They've not found Mr. Right as yet. So in those kind of scenarios, it's a good thing to go to a doctor, fertility specialist, and ask them, listen, what is my stock of eggs like? Or what is my ovarian reserve like? Do I still have time, or what should I do? And if it is becoming lower than what it is supposed to be for that particular age, then one of the good options is to freeze the eggs. Freeze the eggs. And when you freeze the eggs, it's like putting your money in an FD. Okay, you may never need it. You may never need to use it, but it is there for a rainy day. So that gives you an option to use these eggs. So suppose if you have an example of a woman who's 32 and she's got a low ovarian reserve, or is suboptimal, then you freeze her eggs, and she's still not settled down. So suppose she gets married when she's 38, she still has the 32-year-old eggs which she can use, which is better than using 38-year-old eggs. which she may or may not have at that point of time. So that is something that women should be aware about, that there is an option of freezing eggs for them to retain their fertility and have their own genetic baby at a later date.
I think this has already caught up. I see a lot of people actually freezing eggs. But how economical is it? I'm just curious to ask.
It is much cheaper than having a full IVF. I think it is something that one must invest in, especially if they have not had any plans of settling down, or even if they are settled down, even if they have gotten married and not planning to have a baby as yet. You never know what the future holds. You never know if they will change their mind. So for that reason, freezing one's eggs is a good option.
What's the success rate of this?
It's quite high because egg freezing now, shall we say in the early 2000, like for example 2005, shall we say, the technology was still evolving. Okay, so there was only what is called as slow freezing. Now there is rapid freezing, which is called as vitrification. So technology has increased by leaps and bounds, and egg freezing has become quite a robust, viable technology, where once we freeze the eggs, we freeze it in liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degrees centigrade, and whenever we want, we can take it out, and when we thaw it, of course some of the eggs are lost, but a large amount are retained. So it's quite a robust technology now.
Very interesting. Any technologies to assist women with lower ovarian reserve?
You mean to try and bring it up?
Yes.
Once it is low, there is no technology, but definitely preventive measures, leading a healthy lifestyle, not eating out all the time. Like for example, when I asked one of the patients, do you eat out? She said, no, we order from Swiggy. That is still eating out. That is not homemade, and because when you eat out, the kind of oil that they use, for example, just chips, when you go and buy chips from outside, they're not going to throw away that whole, huge bundle of oil, which is heated and reheated and reheated and reheated again the next day, producing so many toxins. So it's eating out is not the best thing. Eat out maybe once in 15 days or twice a month or something, but not more than that. So discarding plastics, which is very, very important. I tell all my patients, just throw out all your plastics, go back to glassware or stainless steel or copper, whatever your mother and your grandmother used to use. And then exercising, eating a lot more. Like colored vegetables, which are raw, like for example raw capsicum, which is red, green and yellow, beetroot, your mullangi, which is radish, carrot, etc. So colored vegetables, when you eat them raw and you add on a lot of sprouts and eat them like a salad, it has a high level of antioxidants, which is very good for the body and for the cells. So healthy lifestyle, some amount of exercise, no smoking, no drug abuse, alcohol in moderation. So those are the lifestyle changes that one can make.
I think a lot of people know this in theory, but they don't want to practice it.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's now time to bust some myths around ovarian reserve. Has it got anything to do with age? And there's also a myth that if you have regular menstrual cycle, you're all good to go.
No, not really. Regular menstrual cycles doesn't really kind of tell you that. Doesn't give you a picture of ovarian reserve. It tells you that your ovaries are working and they're still producing hormones, but what the levels of hormones are and how many eggs is a completely different story.
Moving on to the next segment, this is something that all the couples deal with. This is unexplained infertility. Could you throw more light on this?
Yeah. Unexplained infertility affects about, shall we say, 20 to 25% of couples. The rest of them have some explanation. It's either they're not ovulating, or they're ovulating very few times, or the husband has a problem, or there is a uterine factor, something wrong with the uterus, or there's infections. Whatever, it has some kind of an explanation. Unexplained infertility affects about 20 to 25% of the couples. There are various definitions for unexplained infertility, but the most simple one would be when every other test that you have done to kind of find out why they have not been able to conceive has come out as normal, and the patients and the couple still has not been able to conceive, that's when you would call it unexplained, because you've done all the tests that can be done. You looked at the tubes, looked at the uterus, you looked at the ovaries, you've seen that they're producing an egg, the husband is okay, wife is perfectly fine, but still they're not getting pregnant. So that is something called as unexplained infertility.
Could you elaborate more on the process of finding out about this?
Unexplained infertility is a diagnosis of exclusion. Now, what does that mean? That means that you have excluded all the other causes of infertility. So, they could be hormonal causes, there could be, shall we say, polycystic ovaries with all this associated hormonal and the quality of the eggs, etc., whatever that comes along with polycystic ovaries, their high testosterone levels, etc. You excluded tubal factors, that is the factors in the fallopian tube. You've excluded uterine factors, which may be hindering a pregnancy. You've excluded male factors, that means the husband is okay, he's normal, he's produced enough sperm, the motility is good, the sperm are normal looking, everything is fine. So you excluded most of the causes, the common causes of infertility: thyroid problems, vitamin D deficiency, hyperprolactinemia. So all those are the common causes of infertility. So we excluded all of them. Everything is fine, and still the patient doesn't, shall we say, conceive. Okay, so what do you do for them? Then that comes to the next portion, where you would have to sit down with them and tell them, look, all your tests are okay and you're still not happening, and you've been mad for X number of years and you've been trying. So we need to look at some other modality of treatment, like for example intrauterine insemination of sperm, or in vitro fertilization, or ICSI, which is the intracytoplasmic sperm injection.
So when do you actually break this news to the couple? They have a particular reaction. What do you usually advise them?
Their reaction is they kind of have reached the end of their tether already. And people who come to us now, we are like a tertiary referral unit, where they've tried everything, they've gone everywhere, they've done all the treatments, and they're still not getting pregnant, and they are quite frustrated. So they come with the attitude of, okay, I've done it all, now tell me do all the tests, whatever I'm supposed to have, and get me pregnant. You just have to do it regardless of anything. You just have to do it. Just get me pregnant. And so they are frustrated, they are depressed, they are at the brink of, God, am I ever going to get pregnant? Am I ever going to have a baby? And that's how they come with. That's the psychological state in which they are. And we kind of, I'm talking from my experience. So when they come to me, I will fill up the blanks, see what all tests have been done, see if there are any other tests that are required. And then if everything is fine and they have been trying for a long time and still not gotten pregnant, and they've tried, usually people who come to us have tried all the various other treatments of IUI and, trying to kind of take some medication and try by themselves and lots of other things, then we say, yes, you have to go in for an IVF or an ICSI procedure. And then that is when sometimes, not all the times, but quite often, you find out what is the quality of the eggs. Okay, sometimes you have a situation where you have injected the sperm into the egg, but it is still not fertilized. The sperm and the egg don't meet. Meeting of sperm and the egg is called fertilization. They just don't meet. Or it'll fertilize and it'll divide to a certain extent and then stop. So there are various situations which you can analyze when you do an IVF, because otherwise everything is fine. On paper they are first class. There's nothing wrong with them. So what exactly is happening would then come down to the sperm, the egg, and the uterus, which is where, because you will take the embryo that is formed and put it back into the uterus, and we can't go and stick it into the uterus. We just kind of gently leave it there in the middle of the uterus, and it has to go and stick to the lining of the womb. That is a stage that is not controlled by us. We can't do anything about it. It just has to go. It has to have a communication with the uterus, the inner lining, and there's something called as, the inner lining of the womb is called as endometrium, and there's something called as embryo endometrium crosstalk. So the embryo talks to the endometrium, and the endometrium recognizes that the embryo is there and has to hold it. So all those are factors that are not really in our control.
I know sometimes it's not meant to be, but is there anything remotely research or theory which suggests what exactly is the cause?
No, like I said, there's a lot of research happening. When you see that the quality of the egg is not okay, then that gives you a clue. Second thing is that the jump, when see we grow these embryos, uh, so the egg and the sperm meet and it forms what is called as a zygote, and then that starts to divide. So one cell becomes two, two becomes four, four becomes eight. Okay, until day 3. On the day 3 of development, we keep it in the lab. We grow it in the lab in incubators, specialized instruments which control the pH, the temperature, the humidity that is required for the embryo growth, and then we grow it till day 5. So from the growth from day 3 to day 4 is a huge step in an embryo's life. It's like a baby, like a baby should get neck control. That's a milestone. So from day 3 to day 4, a lot of the embryos don't grow, and there's a particular reason for that. Okay, then when they grow from day 4, day 5, then they form a blastocyst. At that point of time, the day 5 embryo is called as a blastocyst. At that point of time, if a patient has not been able to conceive, one of the newer technologies that can be done is to actually take a few cells from this developing embryo, about 5 to 8 cells. There are plenty of cells in the embryo. At that point of time, the cells are rapidly dividing. So you take part of the cells and you send it off for genetic analysis to see whether this embryo is genetically normal or not, even before putting it into the uterus. Normally what happens, you put the embryo and then the patient becomes pregnant, and then by about 12 weeks or 13 weeks or something, you find out that, oh, this embryo is not so good, or it may be at a high risk of having intellectual disability. Okay, then you have to, depending upon what the patient says and what your tests say, then you will talk to them and you may have to terminate that pregnancy. So this does not need that. It is called as pre-implantation genetic testing. So you look at the embryo when it is at the embryo stage, day 5, and you kind of find out whether there are genetic abnormalities in these embryos even before putting them in. So you can deselect the abnormal embryos and only put in the normal ones. So that is the next step, next level in technology that we have, and that seems to increase the pregnancy rate by about 10 to 15%. But there is no way that one can give you 100% pregnancy rate anywhere in the world.
It's fascinating how the technology is so advanced.
Yeah.
Moving on to different treatments for infertility.
So that again depends. Everybody who walks into our doors does not need the highest treatment. It depends upon how long they've been married, how much they've been trying, the various risk factors, the problems that they are having. Like for example, if somebody has blood-filled cysts inside the ovary, that is called as endometriosis, then that has to be treated. So there are various treatments, starting from, shall we say, laparoscopic surgery to treat, shall we say, PCO, to treat endometriosis, and then to kind of set the whole system right, and then go with smaller treatments. I believe in trying to get the patient pregnant as naturally as possible. So we start, the basic treatment would be to monitor the natural cycle and ask them to have intercourse at the right time, because looking at the ultrasound evidence of an egg being released, so that is called as ovulation. So if the patient is ovulating, then you ask them to have intercourse at that point of time, because a lot of the couples do not know when to have intercourse in the menstrual cycle. So that is one thing. That will be the basic. And then after that, if they're not getting pregnant with that, then maybe give them some medication to help them to ovulate, and then ask them to have intercourse. If that's not happening, then you give them medication to bring out a lot more eggs, another 1 or 2 more eggs, and then you take the sperm from the husband, the semen, and you clean it and you put it into the uterus. So that is called as intrauterine insemination of sperm. And if again they do not get pregnant with that, then the last step would be IVF. But not everybody requires that. It's only a certain population of people who require that.
And doctor, what is the success rate of this?
IVF you're talking about?
No, generally when you are treating them, when they come to you and you give them some suggestions?
Well,
So
it
what is
depends
the-
upon each patient. No, I
Okay.
mean their patient profile. But in general, an IUI, at least in our unit, I can only talk about our unit. And in general, also with IUI, the success rates would be anywhere between 20 and 22%. Which is the pregnancy rate, and again they can have miscarriages, so the number of people who are taking a baby home will be about 12 to 15 per 100 with an IUI cycle, whereas in our hospital with IVF it would be about 55 to 65% pregnancy rate, so it's quite good.
Oh, that's nice to hear. So, do you have any success stories that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, plenty.
I'm sure.
Because we are now going to be next year we're going to be a 50-year-old organization.
Lovely.
But one thing that comes into mind is a lady, or well, if she's going to watch this podcast, she'll know that I'm talking about her. She's somebody who I admire for her resilience, her determination, and her perseverance, her faith in herself, and her determination to take a baby home, and her story is like this. She's a 38-year-old lady and who was married for 15 years when she had come to us. She had a history of 7 abortions. Okay, abortions in the sense miscarriages, not them terminated, but miscarriages. She had also undergone 2 IVFs previously, which had failed outside somewhere else before she came to us. So when she came to us, we did a detailed evaluation of her whole situation, and we had to do what is called as an adenomyomectomy because her uterus was quite distorted, and we had to cut a part of the uterus and make the shape okay and take out what we call as an adenomyoma. And we also put what is called as a abdominal cerclage. That means because she had had 1 or 2 pregnancies that had miscarried in the second trimester. Second trimester is in the middle of the pregnancy. That is between 13 weeks, after 12 weeks, after 3 months, right up to about 7-8 months. Yeah, 7 months. So we had put a stitch around the neck of the womb, and then she underwent IVFs, and she underwent 6 IVFs. Yeah. So I asked her, why are you undergoing so many IVFs? Why are you doing this? So she said, I want maximum number of embryos. Now, how do you get maximum number of embryos? By having a large number of eggs. So she underwent 6 IVFs, and she was 38. And she wanted to send these embryos for genetic testing, like we just talked about pre-implantation genetic testing, to make sure that she was putting the genetically normal embryos back in. So she underwent 6 IVFs, and then at each time we could only retrieve about 3 point something or 3 or 4 eggs each time. So she got a total of 21 eggs in all these and produced a total of 14 embryos out of them. Okay, and they were all day 5 blastocysts. Then she said, I want all of them to go for genetic testing. So we sent 13. 13 survived, and we sent 13 for genetic testing. And out of that, she only got 7 embryos that were normal, genetically normal. The rest of them were abnormal. So the first time, her husband said, I only want 1 embryo to be put in, and because she's had this operation on the uterus, and I'm very worried. So we put in 1 genetically normal embryo, which did not work. She did not become pregnant. Okay. So the second time she came, and then she told me, said that, now listen to my husband, now I want to put in 2. So please put in 2 embryos. And I told her, listen, they're going to have twins. It's very difficult. Twin pregnancies are very, very, that again comes into a high risk group. Very difficult to manage twin pregnancies. So I told her all that. She said, I'm willing to take the risk. You please put it in. So I put in 2 embryos, and she got pregnant. Okay. Everything was fine till she reached about 21 weeks. That is 5 months of pregnancy. After which, 1 baby was very small, but not growing adequately, and the other baby was huge. Okay, and this is called as discordancy in twins, which happens, and it's very difficult to treat. So I told her, listen, let that 1 baby go off. It's okay, doesn't matter. It's very, very small, and there's a huge discrepancy in the weights between the twins. So if it goes at this stage, at 5 months, it doesn't matter, the other baby will be fine. She said, nothing doing. I've come this far and you've brought me till here. You have to see me through. And then I said, okay, fine, I will do my best for you, but you have to also walk with me. You walk with me and I'll walk with you. So then she used to come. She was a lady who had so much of determination and so much of grit, saying, I'm going to get these babies. There's nothing that's going to stop me. And I want people to understand that, because that is that positive attitude and that faith, not in me or in the hospital, that is a faith in themselves that I'm going to get this through and I'm going to get this baby. And so she came, and we kind of increased her nutritional requirements, and she would come, every so often, and listened to us, right down to the, to the smallest detail. And she pushed the pregnancy, and at 32 weeks, she actually the water burst. So we had to deliver her. We delivered her, and she produced twins, one boy, one girl. I think one was about 1.2 kg, other one was about 1.6. Had to stay in the neonatal intensive care for some time, for a few weeks. But the babies are beautiful now. Simply beautiful. And I wanted to tell you the story because that lady was the epitome of determination and positivity. Now, of course, her husband was there right behind her, pushing her and her family. And you need that family support. You need somebody, yes, you're doing it. You're going to be fine. You're going to get the babies. And somebody like that to keep on telling her. And she was simply amazing. And the amount that she went through, I have another 2 or 3 patients like that who are going through all that, and they're all simply fantastic. They don't give up. And the moral is that even if you've had 7 or 8 or even 10 abortions, you will get there. Just hang in there, don't give up your hope. And there are so many innovations, so many other options that you can try when you're trying for a pregnancy. The door doesn't get, there's no closure. Suppose you can't get pregnant with your own eggs. Suppose you have a decrease. We talked about decreased ovarian reserve. Suppose your reserve is in your shoes. There's always donor eggs. There's another option. There's always another option if your mind is open to it. So the message that I want to bring about is stay positive. I know it's very difficult to stay positive in a lot of these circumstances, but you will get there, and have faith in yourself that you're going to definitely do it, and you're definitely going to deliver your babies.
I think we just spoke about a super woman. We are really inspired by her journey, and I'm just curious, what are the risk factors involved in this?
In
This,
her journey?
Yeah, her journey.
Well,
Because she was resilient, and you were also guiding her through, but there would also be risks involved.
yeah, the fact that she could have lost that one baby, okay, with twin pregnancy itself, the risks are like double than what you would have in a singleton pregnancy. So she could have ruptured her membranes anytime. She could have had a preterm delivery. She could have had high blood pressure. She could have had diabetes, because now she's 38 years old and she's dealing with twins. She could have had what is called as abruption, antepartum hemorrhage, where they suddenly will bleed. Okay, they bleed behind the placenta, and then that's it, the babies go, and the mother's life is at risk. So anything could have happened, but then there are certain risk factors that will kind of lead on to that kind of a scenario, which you should be very aware about, and you should take the right steps at the right time. And we had also, there is something, because we anticipated that she may deliver early because of her twin pregnancy and whatever else was happening. I don't remember the nitty-gritty of her story. This is just a broad outline. We had also steroided her. That means we had given her steroids to help the baby's lungs to mature, because premature babies cannot breathe by themselves very easily. So when you give steroids to the mother, it helps to mature the lungs. So we had done a lot of things in anticipation that she may get into trouble, because it was a stormy pregnancy. It was not an easy pregnancy. So, but then the important thing was that she trusted us also. There are a lot of people who say, I can't do it. And when they say that, there's nothing much that we can do. But she said, I'm going to do everything that requires and that has to be done to get these babies. And she got it. Amazing.
I think hope is a very magical word, and she's truly an inspiration to us all.
Yes, but then the thing is that that hope, no, to get that hope which is down in your shoes, to get it up, is difficult, and that's where the family, the husband, the positive reinforcement techniques that maybe the hospital provides, which we definitely provide in our hospital, lot of counseling from the doctors, and telling them, listen, I'm there with you, I'm holding your hand, you walk with me.
Yes, that's really inspiring.
Yeah.
Thank you. Uh, Doctor, have there been any miracles during your journey as a doctor?
Yeah, so many that I sometimes I feel I don't know enough infertility at all. I don't know my specialty, because people get pregnant in so many different ways when we don't expect them to. So I have actually two short stories. One is a lady who was 38 or 39 when she came, and her ovarian reserve was very low. We do a test called AMH to detect the ovarian reserve. It is very, very low. So I said, come on, buck up. You're already 38 or 39. You have to rush towards your destination. So have an IVF and get on with things. So she said, yeah, I'll do it the next cycle. But right now I have my old grandmother in my house who I have to kind of settle, completely and get a help for her, because I'm going to be coming to the hospital often. So this cycle I will do a simpler treatment called IUI, which is just taking, giving them medication, allowing the eggs to come out and develop, and then you just take the husband's sperm and put it into the uterus. So the sperm and the egg should do their own thing and should, have a pregnancy if it is bound to happen. So I said, okay, fine. And I told her, okay, your pregnancy rates are going to be very low because of your low AMH and your age also. But anyway, because you want it, we'll try. But then if it doesn't work out, next time you have to come for a IVF procedure. So she said, fine. We did an IUI, got pregnant, smooth sailing pregnancy, delivered a baby. Wow. Beautiful boy baby. And then, by herself, she just did it. And then she came back again 3 years later and said, she said, by that time she was some 41 or 42, and said, I want to do another IUI. I said, listen, you're pushing your luck. Okay, you're really pushing it now. You're 42 and I do not know how your eggs are going to be, and gave her the long story about, disabled children and blah, blah, and all that thing, and how she may not be able to get pregnant also. She said, I want to try an IUI anyway. So she tried it, got pregnant again. So there are situations, unfortunately, that ended in a miscarriage. But then it's amazing how people get pregnant. And I had another girl who was 34 or 35 years of age who had an AMH, which was again very low, very, very low this time. So we told her, listen, your AMH is, your ovarian reserve is so low, I don't think you'd be able to produce any eggs by yourself. So she said, okay, what do I do? So we suggested donor eggs to be fertilized with her husband's sperm. And we put in a embryo formed like that into her. She didn't get pregnant. 3 months later, she's come with a pregnancy, her own pregnancy, naturally. And then pregnancy again was smooth sailing and delivered a baby. Then about 2-3 years later, again she came, and then I saw her in the COVID time. I said, what, do you have fever? Do you have, what is the problem? Why have you come? She said, I missed my period. I may be pregnant. Sure enough, she was pregnant again with a really low ovarian reserve, and again delivered a beautiful, the first one was a girl, the second one was a boy, did it all by herself. So, we really do not know. It was a lot of luck, I guess, in that situation. But people have the luck, and people are getting pregnant like that as well. So everybody who walks into your hospital doesn't need to actually have an IVF. These are a lot of stories that pregnancies can happen. So don't give up hope. There are lots of ways pregnancies can happen, and they do happen. These are all real life stories. So just hang in there. It'll happen. You'll get a baby.
They say doctors are the living gods, but these miracles are straight out of heavens.
Yes. There's no doubt about that, because we can't explain it. There is just no explanation. And it's just the right egg at the right time, and the right sperm at the right time, and refusing, and things just click. That's it. So Path to Parenthood is an event that is being organized in Palace Grounds in Bangalore on the 19th and the 20th of October. I would like all the prospective parents or women who want to know a little bit more about fertility and parenthood and the associated fields with it, or connected to it, to attend this meeting, because there are going to be plenty of interesting lectures and interesting events, and we're trying to build a community. So do please participate in large numbers and attend the event, so your knowledge also gets extended and your experience is enriched. Thank you.
Doctor, you have tremendous information, knowledge, and experience. Thanks for imparting your wide spectrum of thoughts onto our viewers. And viewers, there's still a lot of hope, there's a lot of support around you. Watch out and all the very best. Thanks for watching our show. This is Shruti Raghunanda signing off.